be the sole revealers of all that pertaineth unto him, and hath caused them to move through the firmament of perfection in arcs of descent and ascent. He hath ordained these names and attributes to be the first and foremost origin and cause of being in the world of creation, and the source of the different grades of realities in the degrees of existence. When, through its power of attraction and propagation, the day star of names and attributes shone upon the hidden realities in the heart of the unseen realm, they issued forth, were spread abroad, scattered about, set in order, became the recipients of the grace of God and his outpourings, and were made to be the sole manifestations of the divine conditions and eternal signs. Emerging from behind the veils, they appeared clothed in raiments of light, moving in the firmament of the unity of God, in orbits of sanctity and circles of glorification. Thus the sons of the praise of one true God move resplendent in a vast infinite space, capable neither of being defined by limits nor contained within the compass of signs and illusions. All praise be to him who was its author and creator, who spread it out and adorned it with countless lamps and never-fading luminaries. None knoweth the hosts of thy Lord save him. He made the circuits of these luminous divine orbs to be their lofty and celestial spheres, and he made the bodies of these spiritual spheres and move in their vast space by the aid of their creator and maker, their ordainer and fashioner.
Glorified art thou, O God of all names and creator of the heavens. I render thee thanks that thou hast made known unto thy servants this day whereon the river that is life indeed hath flowed forth from the fingers of thy bounty, and the springtime of thy revelation and thy presence hath appeared through thy manifestation unto all who are in thy heaven and all who are on thy earth. This is the day, O my Lord, whose brightness thou hast exalted above the brightness of the sun and the splendors thereof. I testify that the light it sheddeth proceedeth out of the glory of the light of thy countenance, and is begotten by the radiance of the morn of thy revelation. This is the day whereon the hopeless have been clothed with the raiment of confidence, and the sick attired with a robe of healing, and the poor drawn nigh unto the ocean of thy riches. I swear by thy beauty, O King of eternity, who sitteth on thy most glorious throne, he who is the dayspring of thy signs and the revealer of thy clear tokens, hath, notwithstanding the immensity of his wisdom and the loftiness of his knowledge, confessed his powerlessness to comprehend the least of thine utterances in their relation to thy most exalted pen. How much more is he incapable of apprehending the nature of thine all-glorious self and of thy most august essence. Baha'u'llah.
That brings to a close our devotions for this morning. We have some announcements. I'm not sure who is going to make those announcements, but whoever is going to make them, please come on up.
I just want to say to everybody, the radio station KURE is open all day long. If you want to come over, I definitely want to interview some of you, put you on the air. So just come over. You see where the tower is. Come over, and I'm in there working at the radio. So everybody's invited.
Thank you. Allow Pa friends. Oh, come on. Allow Pa friends. Are you awake this morning? Well, wake up. Call and response. Call and response. Okay, this is one of my most favorites. I hope I have a voice this morning. Listen up. Dunya nasage nagena. Call and response. You ready? Dunya nasage nagena. Me. Dunya kompage nagena. Dunya kompage nagena. Yange yambange. Yange yambange. Ole ni tole. Ole ni tole. Yukulububa haula. Yukulububa haula. O men of the world, O women of the world, from east to west, from north to south, come hear the message of Baha'u'llah. Okay? One of the first songs I learned from pioneers from Burkina Faso at Greenacre High School 1,000,000 years ago. So here we go, one more time. Burkina Faso. Okay. Dunya nasage nagena. Dunya kompage nagena. Dunya kompage nagena. Yange yambange. Yange yambange. Hole ni tole. Hole ni tole. Yukulubu bahula. Yukulubu bahula. One more yuku. Yukulubu bahula. Yukulubu bahula. This is my dear friend, Susanna Sutton, whom I met about 30 years ago at Greenacre. And she is one of our new coordinating team members. And you got it?
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Lajamaya. Welcome, welcome, and I hope I can fulfill my position with the announcements and get them all right. First of all, welcome, all of you. Many of you have been here many times and probably know these announcements by heart. But Desert Rose Baha'i School started in 1988 in Tucson. So this is our 30th year to have the Desert Rose Baha'i School. Many of you may wish to visit Marguerite Sears' gravesite, which is here at the Memorial Gardens. We have a few housekeeping items to cover. One, that our water is from a well. It's well water. And so people may want to, I don't know, there may be a message that goes with that, but I don't know what it is. You can drink it. Okay, thank you, Hannah. Septic tanks, we want to be careful with the septic tanks. Only bodily wastes go down the toilets, and just keep an idea that we are out in the desert. When you use the toilet, please hold the handle down until it's finished. And this just will help the pressure and so on. The location of the bathrooms, there's some bathrooms that way, there's some bathrooms that way. Aha. Okay, so the male are over there, the female are over there. Thank you, Betty. Please put your name on your program so that if you put it down somewhere, you'll be able to retrieve it and somebody won't claim it for their own. And we want to also mention that if people can be aware that sometimes there are people with allergies, so we ask for no perfumes or aftershave, as this sometimes triggers an allergy. If you are going to speak, if there's questions and answers or people wish to speak, if you don't use the microphone, your questions and comments are not recorded. So I'm a person who doesn't like to use a microphone, but I'm going to train myself because we want to make sure that things are recorded. If you have any problems, there are 5 of us now that you can get a hold of. Some of us know more answers than the others, but we will all be at your service. And that will be Ginny and Bonnie, as you know, and then John Sutton, and Paul Rourke and myself. Please call on us if there's anything you need. And I think that's good.
So that puts me back up here, and oh boy, are we ever... We're on time, people. Now, that's really saying something. Now, we have this wonderful speaker with us, and he has all of this information to share with us, and we want to make sure he has enough time to do that. So the best way to be sure that happens is for us to stay on time. So let's take a look at our program. For all those who are staying on campus, breakfast is served at what time? And when does serving stop? Oh, okay. And you know what that means? The door is closed. The door is closed. So we want to make sure we get here for breakfast for those who are guests on campus between 8 and 8:45. So you don't want to wait until 8:45 to come through, because we've got people who will volunteer. Oh, I forgot to mention, didn't I? We're building community this weekend. See that sign on the back wall? John, could you read that out loud for us? What does that sign say at the top there? Service ops, meaning opportunities. And it's broken down for all of the meals before and after and the evening. So there's setup times for evening program. There's assistants in the kitchen, and there are 3 slots in each position. So what we'd like to do is give people an opportunity to be of service, and we know that's one of the greatest ways of creating community is serving one another, right? Okay, who's going to come in tomorrow morning before breakfast to help in the kitchen? We need 3 people. 1, 2, 3. Please go and sign up. Yes, right now. Okay. Take a pen with you so you can write your name up there. That's tomorrow morning, breakfast. Who is going to sign up for the service opportunity for lunch today at 12:15? Oh, you did? Oh, are there 3 people up there? 2? You want to go do the other one? Okay. Hey, my. Okay, who's cleaning up after lunch? 3 people. 1, 2, 3. Please go sign up. Thank you. Now, dinner time. Okay, we need a 3rd one for lunch. Go for it, Mark. Opportunity for service after dinner. Now, after dinner, we have our evening program, and that's going to start at 7:15. So dinner is from 5:30 to 6:15. So we need 3 people for cleanup at 6:15. All 3? 2. We need 1 more person for dinner. Do it, please. Thank you. Now, here we are getting ready for the evening entertainment. So we need 3 people to make sure everything is set up on stage and the chairs are back in place, etc. 3 people for setup for evening entertainment. 1. Who else? 2. Great. And 3. Please go sign up. Thank you. Now, we've got our tomorrow morning breakfast before breakfast. How about tomorrow morning after breakfast? Tomorrow morning after breakfast. 1, 2. Please. Just go right over and sign up. 3. Thank you. And tomorrow afternoon before lunch. 1. You signed up already? Okay. So we need 1 more person before lunch tomorrow. 1 more before lunch. Yes. Thank you. Ooh, 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 ooh. So while they're doing that, I'm going to teach you a song. Do 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 do. Try that. Do-do-do, do-do, do-do. One more time. Do-do-do, do-do, do-do. Okay, one more. Listen up. Do-do-do, do-do, do-do. Do-do-do, do-do, do-do. One more time, the same one. Do-do-do, do-do, do-do. Okay, try both of those, one after the other. Do-do-do, do-do, do-do. Do-do-do, do-do, do-do. Very good. Try it harmonized. Do-do-do, do-do, do-do. Do-do-do, do-do, do-do. Do-do-do, do-do, do-do. Very good. You all sound good. Hey, did you know that music actually creates community? It's bringing minds and hearts and very vibrations together into one. Okay, we're going to try that one more time. I'm going to put this down. And I'm purposely breaking it up like that. Now, if you don't want to do, you can la. So try some variety in there. Or you might like to say, me. That's kind of... Okay. There's... Or we. I'm thinking do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, not me. But, okay. I want you to get that last line. Do, 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 do. Try that. Bum, ba, da, da, dee, 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 dum, bum, ba, da, dee, 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 dee. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? So we do the first one, clap twice. Second one, clap twice. Third one, clap twice. Do the last part and clap 4 times. Okay, it'll be easier when you hear the words. Okay, hear the words. But everybody's got the tune. Truthfulness is the foundation. Clap, clap. Truthfulness is the foundation. Clap, clap. Truthfulness is the foundation. Clap, clap. To building community with love and unity and trustworthiness. Hair's too high for me, so I'm going to have to go down low. Truthfulness is the foundation. Truthfulness is the foundation. Truthfulness is the foundation to building community with love and unity and trustworthiness. Okay, so to building community with love and unity and what? Trustworthiness. So you got it now, right? To building community with love and unity and trustworthiness. Okay, call and response. Ready? Truthfulness is the foundation. 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 Truthfulness was a little song that a group that I participated in a year ago, January, with a workshop with Cindy Savage and Trip Barthel. We created little communities, and each community was responsible for, in some way, giving an artistic presentation related to their building community. So my group did that song. And I said, well, dang, we got to use it again. So I said, this weekend, what are we doing? What's the title of our program this weekend? Yes. So you got to start with the Baha'i concept, right? Truthfulness is the foundation. So this week, we have this wonderful, wonderful presentation being given to us that we're going to create a new world. And we're going to do it together, starting right here. This evening's program will feature 3 artists who will be singing songs for us. Carl, where are you, Carl? Carl's sitting right back here. Where's Michael? Michael's sitting right up here. Where's Chris? Oh, okay, Chris. Okay, they're going to start out our program this evening with some songs because we want music to fill our hearts and our minds and the whole air in this building. Then we're going to have a Jeopardy game. Where's Mark? Mark's right at the back. And Mark will be hosting a Jeopardy game centered around the hands of the cause of God. And following that, Ed Pease, who's not yet here, will be hosting a karaoke. So everybody will get a chance to do truthfulness is the fun. I mean, whatever it is, you know? So we want to have fun. We want to have fun together. We want to create community, and we want everybody to participate. So I get the pleasure now of introducing our speaker, Dr. Stephen Phelps. So I'm in the front of the book, you'll see this, of course. So you can read it for yourself, but I just want to give voice to what it says. Dr. Stephen Phelps received dual bachelor's degrees in physics and philosophy from Stanford University and a PhD in physics from Princeton University, specializing in cosmology. That does not say cosmetology. It says cosmology. He served at the Baha'i World Center in Haifa, Israel, for 13 years in its research department, where he coordinated the indexing and collation of Baha'i sacred writings and their translation from Persian and Arabic into English. During that period, he concurrently held a research position in the physics department at the Technion University in Haifa and published original research on the masses of nearby galaxies. Whoa. Oh. Dr. Phelps has several Baha'i Association YouTube talks online and is a faculty member with the Wilmette Institute. He currently resides in the Portland area with his wife and 3 daughters. I'd like for you to give a warm welcome to Dr. Stephen Phelps, who will be talking on the verge of the new, the Baha'i faith, and the modern world.
Thank you. Okay. Good morning. Shall I stand or sit? Okay. Good to see you all. This is my second time to Desert Rose. The first time was in 1991 when it was still in Tucson. Is anybody in the room? Was anybody here in the room who was there for the 4th Desert Rose in 1991? One person. All right. A couple people. Duffy was there. Pretty cool. So yeah, after a 27-year gap, I'm back. So great to be back. So I have a few ideas to share with you, and these ideas will be an attempt. I would say a very provisional attempt and a comment. Yes. Sure. Please silence your phones. They're not yet. Oh, thank you for reminding me. Okay. Yes. Okay. Get this properly set up. Is that a little better? Okay. So I will be sharing some, let's say, tentative thoughts about how things fit together. And these tentative thoughts have been really a work in progress that parts of which are available on various places on the internet, YouTube a little bit, and SoundCloud. And I've been iterating on these thoughts over the last few years in Italy in, I think, 2015 or 2016, and later in Norway last summer, and in Costa Rica last winter, and in Portugal this summer, and earlier in Washington State also this summer, and these bits and pieces are floating about, and it all represents, I think, perhaps overly ambitious attempt to one might say presenting the outlines of maybe a new theory of history, or a new way of thinking about theology and the relationship between science and religion. I have some slides to go with it, but I don't have an advancer. Is there like a remote advancer, or will I have to assign Brian to forward the slides whenever the time comes? And I don't know what I've got what up there next. It went away. Brian will have to do it. Okay, thanks, Brian. Is it that? Oh, it's that one. Has it been closed? Is the laptop still there? Oh, I see it. Okay. Yeah. Let's go to the next slide. So I think the first slide will be with some text on it. Will give us some idea of what the plan for the weekend is going to be. And I may need a light on the podium if all of these lights are coming down. Although I guess I can just hold the papers. Yeah. Well, the front lights will kind of wash out the... Is that good? Sorry, it's kind of hard to get to optimize for both. Yeah. Aha. It's not a bad idea, actually. Oh, that's actually a really good idea. Okay. Let's see. Oh, this is going to work. Thank you. Okay. So here's the plan. We're going to talk a little bit we're going to start by talking about the present moment and try to situate where we are now in the context of history. History in not so much in the near term in the last few years, but more in the last few centuries, and a little bit beyond that. And the reason we're going to be doing this is, overall, we're going to be trying to answer the question as to what is it that the faith has brought into the world, which has not yet been considered. What ways does it have of seeing world history? What ways does it have about seeing the nature of the spiritual world and its interaction with the physical world in ways that perhaps haven't been thought of before? And to do that, it helps to really zoom out and look at where human history has brought us to the present moment. And part of answering this is going to be we'll be looking at where our exploration of the physical world has brought us in terms of the sorts of insights that modern physics has brought to our understanding of the structure of the physical world, and how that can give us clues to how we might think about what we have thought of as this separate realm of the spiritual. We'll be talking about how ultimately what we know about reality, since we have no direct contact with reality, ultimately is through various degrees of approximation. And we'll be talking in particular in the second half of this series of presentations, we'll be turning more to insights that can be found within the Baha'i writings, which can, I think, crack open a lot of long-standing issues and conundrums in the theological space by giving us pairs of almost opposing ideas where you have one thought and another thought which seems like the opposite thing, which is just as clearly expressed. We'll be concluding with an overall attempt to put these pieces together in one might call a suggestive, overarching narrative, which hopes to unite the various narratives or maps of meaning that have guided humanity in the past. So our present sort of starting point for this is what you might call the vortex of the present, the state of increasing confusion that humanity finds itself in, a state in which our old sense-making apparatus is coming apart. It's the wheels are coming off the bus. The very idea of facts and of truth itself is almost a casualty of the modern era. What is true seems to be becoming more and more a matter of power. You know, those who are in power are able to define what the truth is. Humanity seems to be hurtling towards some unknown climax. But part of the confusion of the present day is that we don't even have clarity on whether things are getting better or getting worse. If you ask different people, you know, some people would say things are bad and they're getting worse, and other people would say, well, things have never been better. In one way, we live in this century of light, a spectacular time in which we're living amidst this explosion of information, technology, which is improving our lives in so many dimensions, in quality and length of life. Extreme poverty is being reduced around the world. There's an avalanche of discoveries about every aspect of the physical world. Our social world is increasingly interconnected and shrinking down. Knowledge and appreciation for cultural diversity is at really all-time highs. If you read a book by Steven Pinker called The Better Angels of Our Nature, you'll read really that things have never been better on all sorts of quantitative scales. If you read also the Baha'i writings, you find these wonderful statements about just what an amazing age we live in. Baha'u'llah in his Book of Certitude writes, "In this day, the breeze of God is wafted, and his spirit hath pervaded all things. Such is the outpouring of his grace that the pen is stilled and the tongue is speechless." And Abdu'l-Baha writes, "This is a new cycle of human power. All the horizons of the world are luminous, and the world will become indeed as a garden and a paradise. It is the hour of unity of the sons of men and of the drawing together of all races and all classes. You are loosed from ancient superstitions which have kept men ignorant, destroying the foundation of true humanity." But the other side of the same coin is that in another way we live in a century of darkness, with wars of increasing ferocity, with tribalism and racism seeming in some way to be on at least a temporary ascent. the othering of entire groups of people, the pillage of our environment, hunger and disease being not solved by any means. There being, although tremendous strides taken towards alleviating the status of those who are in dire poverty, it's at the expense of a widening gap between the rich and the poor, which increases an overall sense of injustice in the world. I read somewhere that the top 8 richest people in the world control around 50% of the wealth of the world. In a way, then, we're teetering on the brink of an abyss. And this also is eloquently described by Baha'u'llah, by Abdu'l-Baha. Baha'u'llah writes, "The world is in travail, and its agitation waxeth day by day. Its face is turned towards waywardness and unbelief. Such shall be its plight that to disclose it now would not be meet and seemly. Its perversity will long continue. And when the appointed hour is come, there shall suddenly appear that which shall cause the limbs of mankind to quake." And Abdu'l-Baha writes, "Chaos and confusion are daily increasing in the world. They will attain such intensity as to render the frame of mankind unable to bear them." So this gives us a sense of an urgency to the present hour, and by present hour I mean really the current period of time we're living in. You know, the space of time, really the last several decades, in which let's say that the tenuous order that emerged after the last World War with the creation of the United Nations, these first glimmerings of hope for some form of coordinated action at a global level seems to be suffering an accelerating breakdown. We see in various countries, including our own, an increase in polarization, which I think everyone is quite painfully aware of. There's a magnification of tribalistic tribalistic tendencies on either end extreme of the political spectrum, and we see also stresses on the environment beginning to be felt globally, which will require some form of global coordinated action to resolve, but that global coordinated action doesn't seem to be coming anywhere along the horizon. Part of the problem, I think, to those who have analyzed the moral quandary in which we find ourselves in this modern age, is that what has been disconnected from what ought. You know, throughout history, there's been a close connection between our idea about what is, what the fundamental facts of the universe are, what things are based on, where our knowledge comes from, where our ethics come from, and as a consequence of that, what we ought to do. And what we find in the modern age, really from let's say, first diagnosed around the mid-19th century, is the idea that that this has been disconnected from the ought. You know, the ought we might call the edifice of Christian ethics, of Judeo-Christian ethics, embodying a certain way of a posture of living and moving and navigating in the world in relation to others, that still exists with us, this edifice of Judeo-Christian ethics. But it's as though the foundation has been knocked away, and it's been knocked away by centuries of erosion on the side of the scientific advances, which have pushed the foundations out from under it. It used to be that there was a universal acknowledgement that the ultimate source of knowledge, of life, of the cosmos and of human law and order were the laws of God, was the revelation of God. And with the advance of a secular mindset and the continuing retreat of a spiritual mindset, that foundation of how the world ultimately has been really pulled out from under us. And what remains is the ought. What we still have is this, everyone tries to agree in a purely secular context that one should do unto others as you would have them do unto you, that one should navigate in the world with love, that justice is a great goal to strive towards. But this edifice of ethics is ultimately, if it's not based upon suitable foundations, then it can begin to crumble before our eyes. And there are those who are attempting to restore that ethical foundation on purely secular grounds, who are trying to find a pathway from is to ought, where the is now no longer a spiritual reality, but a purely material reality. And there are high-profile efforts, at least in the best-selling books and so forth, by certain authors that are trying to reconstruct, let's say, a moral universe on the basis of purely material foundations, but arguably with very limited results, partly because a secular viewpoint has yet to prove that it can provide humanity with a sufficient motivating framework to do what ought to be done. So these couple of days, we won't be talking so much about the politics of the present, but we'll be trying to get back to the root of what's transpiring on a much larger time scale. And the claim I'll be making is that things are not just descending into chaos and nihilism as chaotic as the world seems, but the chaos that we're beholding is a generative chaos. It's a chaos which remixes the board. It produces a reconfiguration of human realities, which is a necessary prelude to the attainment of a higher level of organization. In a word, it is the chaos of a turbulent adolescence through which humanity is presently passing. And this idea implies, as it does in the life of an individual, as an individual passes through childhood into adolescence and maturity, that there will be undreamt of capacities and potentialities that will emerge through this process, that will resolve into new and undreamt of configurations in the world, both in the realm of religion as well as in the realm of science, both in the realm of the spirit as well as the world of matter. As Shoghi Effendi has said, and I think this might be the next quotation, he says, the world has, at least the thinking world, caught up by now with all the great and universal principles enunciated by Baha'u'llah over 70 years ago. And this was written in 1949. So already in 1949, Shoghi Effendi was saying the world is caught up with these social principles. But he goes on to say, but we know that the deeper teachings, the capacity of his projected world order to recreate society are new and dynamic. It is these we must learn to present intelligently and enticingly. And he's talking about those to whom we wanted to present the teachings of the cause to. And it raises and begs the question, what are the deeper teachings that he was talking about? If the world has already caught up with these ideas, well, could the deeper teachings be love for one's neighbor, the golden rule, the oneness of God, the oneness of humanity, elimination of racial prejudice, equality of the sexes, social justice, service. Are these the deeper teachings he was talking about, or are these things that the world had pretty much already caught up with in theory, if not in practice? I mean, it's not as though the world is practicing these things, but most of these ideas have been around for a long time. And they're not they're not news to anyone. And so the question I have is, what are the deeper teachings? If it's not these fundamentals, then what is it? Could we put them, on a slide with bullet points and say, these are the deeper teachings that we're trying to present to the world? Unfortunately, Shoghi Effendi, after writing this letter, didn't say, and the deeper teachings are the following. He sort of left it up to us to figure out what they were. And it will be, I think, part of the exploration of this weekend to perhaps ask the question and maybe answer provisionally, if only to ourselves, what we think some of those deeper teachings actually might be. And it's such an important thing. It's not just an intellectual exercise to sit and ask, what are these deeper teachings? Because ideas have tremendous power in the world. Identifying the right ideas matters. People live and die over ideas. And the sorts of deeper teachings I think that we'll be looking for will have something to do with questions about where is the universe coming from and where is it going? And on this basis, what should we do about it? And on this basis, for what can we hope? There's an enormous difference, for example, between believing in a universe that is fundamentally purposeless versus believing in a universe that is fundamentally going somewhere, that has some goal in mind. The best we can do, it seems, in a purposeless universe is generate our own purpose that leads you to something like some form of existentialism, which is a very different pathway than the sort of life you would build if you believe that there is purpose in the universe, that it's there to be discovered, in which case the purpose of our lives is not to create our own purpose from scratch, but to try to find what that purpose is, to align ourselves with that current that flows through things, and then to act in accordance with it. And this discovery of ultimate purpose and ultimate motion and ground of things will not, in the first place, be a new set of do's and don'ts, but it will be more of a picture of the shape of the whole thing, of the shape of the universe, and on the basis of that, what our unique and individual part might be. So, having said this is, I think, a very ambitious goal for any weekend, and of course, one should warn any attempt to do this on the basis of the Baha'i writings has to acknowledge at the front our very incomplete knowledge and understanding of the Baha'i revelation of the Baha'i writings at this time. Particularly those of us who are, which is most of us, who are confined to reading them in English translation, only about, let's say, 5 to 10% of those writings have yet been translated into English. And even of those who have access to the original languages in Persian and Arabic still only have access to far less than half. Most of it has yet to be organized and published and made available more generally. So what we do is tentative, at least for that, if only for that reason, that we're dealing with a very partial set of the total ideas that are out there. So, just as a prelude to what we'll be doing, a central approach of these sessions will be trying to answer the question of how we can coherently account for internal tensions, for apparent contradictions, for places where it seems to say X in one place and minus X in another place. And to do that, we'll have to be looking at this constellation of ideas as a three-dimensional thing rather than a two-dimensional thing. And by that I mean try to imagine them as a sphere, as Shoghi Effendi suggested to someone who wrote to him complaining about apparent contradictions in the Baha'i writings. He said you have to imagine it like it's a sphere, and in any sphere there are poles on opposite sides, but in between are the thoughts and ideas that unite them. So we'll be looking at various poles and hopefully providing enough suggestive ideas to enough of the meridian lines to try to unite this set of ideas into something resembling the sphere. And in the end, we'll also see, just sort of as a spoiler alert, that in the end, the final picture of things that we'll be leaving you with is the perfection of the circle as the ultimate metaphor for the origin and end of things. So, but before we get to that, let's see what was on the next slide. Let's see. Okay, so this is a lovely passage by Abdu'l-Baha that emphasizes what I was saying just a moment ago about the power of ideas, and it comes from the prelude to The Secret of Divine Civilization. Abdu'l-Baha writes, if we look objectively upon the world of being, it will become apparent that from age to age, the temple of existence has continually been embellished with a fresh grace and distinguished with an ever-varying splendor deriving from wisdom and the power of thought. This supreme emblem of God stands first in the order of creation and first in rank, taking precedence over all created things. Witness to it is the holy tradition. Before all else, God created the mind. From the dawn of creation, it was made to be revealed in the temple of man. Sanctified is the Lord, who with the dazzling rays of this strange heavenly power has made our world of darkness the envy of the worlds of light. This is a beautiful example of how Abdu'l-Baha takes something which, from a secular perspective, you might say, well, the power of thought, the power of the mind, that's an in-the-world thing. That's a power of the, let's say that's a material thing. Abdu'l-Baha spiritualizes it. He takes, and this we'll find is a theme. Jeannie read it also in the devotions right beforehand. That beautiful opening passage from Abdu'l-Baha's Tablet of the Universe, and you listen to this passage about the suns that were created that orbit in circle in arcs of descent and ascent, and these luminous spheres, and it's not clear. And I think Abdu'l-Baha very purposefully is writing it so that you can read this as though he's describing the physical universe, or you can read it as though he's describing the spiritual universe of the prophets, who are like the suns in the world of being, who have their own orbits and move in their own sort of pathways through the heavens. That equally describes the physical universe as well as the spiritual universe. And already we're seeing, I think, one of the themes that is going to dominate our conversation and our exploration over the next couple of days, of there being repeated patterns throughout the physical and spiritual cosmos. And that seems to be one of the structural features of things, and we'll be returning to this more than once. So let's see what I stuck on the next slide. Okay, another passage by Abdu'l-Baha about the power of and importance of thought, and this spiritualization of the idea of thought itself. In Paris Talks, he says, without the Holy Spirit, he would have no intellect. He would be unable to acquire his scientific knowledge by which his great influence over the rest of creation is gained. The illumination of the Holy Spirit gives to man the power of thought and enables him to make discoveries by which he bends the laws of nature to his will. Also, and there's I think this is not a new idea either, but this idea was expressed in the first word of the Gospel of John in the Bible, which begins, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And in the original Greek, that word that was there in the beginning, the logos, is the principle of the intellect. It's the principle of order, which also is a deeply spiritual principle. It's the origin of all things. It's it's what the Baha'i writing is called the primal will, and what Abdu'l-Baha in Some Answer Questions also calls the primal intellect. And that origin point of things is the spiritual origin of creation, and it's sometimes also identified with the Holy Spirit. But it has manifestations in the world. It's the source of order in the world, but it's also the motive force behind the power of thought itself. So what we think of sometimes as our physical capacities, our mental capacities, are at the same time spiritual capacities. It depends on what angle you look at it from. So already there's a hint of what is to come, which is going to be a breaking down of these traditional stark categories that have existed between matter and spirit. The Cartesian categories that has tried to divide the world into two different kinds of substance. We find in passages like this suggestions that what we might have thought of or classified or categorized within the physical world is itself a profoundly spiritual thing. And that, of course, is going to beg the question, well, then what do we mean by spiritual? If something like thought and the power of science is now a spiritual thing, well, a scientist would disagree. They would say, well, that's not spiritual. But to sort of get through to the other side of this, we have to at some point ask ourselves, what do we mean when we say spiritual? What do we mean when we say physical? And we'll be coming back to this. So let's head to the next, and that's just a prefiguration of where we're gonna end up. And ancient symbols which end up recurring throughout history, and which end up becoming embodied in new forms. This is the ancient symbol of the snake swallowing its tail, the Ouroboros, and this one is particularly interesting because it has a sort of a light half and a dark half, a little bit reminiscent of the symbol for the Tao. You have the light and the dark halves. You might think of this as the earliest representation. This is from a manuscript, a Greek manuscript of around, I think 200 or 300 AD. You might think of this as the earliest representation of the arcs of ascent and descent, which was referenced in that devotional reading that Jeannie read, but also we'll be looking at it in much more detail tomorrow. The idea of arcs of ascent and descent is going to end up being let's say the unifying metaphor that makes sense of a lot of these a lot of the different ideas we're going to be exploring. But let's pass through this to the statement by Shoghi Effendi, which perhaps will kick us off into the next section of these remarks. Although he doesn't say this is one of the deeper teachings, I think this might be one of them, if considering how Shoghi Effendi describes this. He says, humanity taken as a whole has entered the most critical and momentous stage of its evolution, the stage of maturity. This idea of the coming of age of mankind constitutes the central core of the Baha'i teachings and is the most distinguishing feature of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. A proper understanding of this concept gives a key to an adequate appreciation of the tremendous claim made by the author of the faith. So this is a pretty central idea of the coming of age of the human race. And to understand it in its fuller context, we need to zoom out to an earlier time in human history. Let's try the next slide. And this, even from Shoghi Effendi, as we start this journey, maybe a word of caution of how little we are in a position to really understand the totality of things at this time. He says, all we can reasonably venture to attempt is to strive to obtain a glimpse of the first streaks of the promised dawn that must, in the fullness of time, chase away the gloom that has encircled humanity. I'm not sure how many qualifiers are there, 6 or 7 in a row. That's quite a pileup of qualifiers. So, what first streaks and glimpses might we get if we try to back off or get to as high level point as possible and ask what direction human history has followed, at least insofar as we've been able to reconstruct it on the basis of historical and archaeological evidence. Let's go to the next slide. So let's zoom out and ask ourselves, what are some of the signal events in human history? One way of looking at history is that it's a continuous stretch of time in which things are happening all the time, and there's a continuous emphasis on continuity, a continuous process of evolution from a more primitive state to a less primitive state. That's one way of looking at history. But when we look at, and there's always a tendency, and there's always, I think, a temptation on the part of those who study history to try to divide it up, because it's easier to think about it in that way. And so, given the fact that there's this tendency to take something which is continuous and to break it up into pieces and to try to identify the high points, and in doing so, there's a danger of taking something which is a whole and breaking it, shattering it unnecessarily into parts. I think, given that caveat, there's some evidence for there being within the long reach of human history certain signal events which punctuate what otherwise might be considered the continuous stability of things. But there are certain times in which human evolution has taken leaps forward. And we don't know what all those leaps forward have been. Certainly we can imagine the discovery of fire would have been a great leap forward. The movie 2001 gives us, I think, a really vivid image of what a leap forward in primate evolution might have looked like. This one perhaps influenced or catalyzed by something from above, literally in the case of the obelisk. But the obelisk is a great stand-in for our idea of revelation. What is our concept of divine revelation almost is something that comes from above, erupts into the world all of a sudden, and catalyzes a leap forward in human spiritual evolution. We don't know about what it was that may have catalyzed these earliest leap forwards in human thought. We can imagine something like this sci-fi scenario, or we could imagine that as in more recent epochs of human history, these leap forwards that occurred in the distant past may also have taken place under the influence of individuals that perhaps we wouldn't call them prophets or manifestations, but we might say that there have always been in every epoch those individuals who are far in advance of others, who are able to see things with clearer vision than others, who have, let's say, an understanding of the interrelationships that proceed from the realities of things and are able to translate that intuition about interrelationships into practical things. And ultimately, that is, as we'll find out, the very definition of a prophet or a manifestation is one who has that grasp of the interrelationships that proceed from the realities of things. In this very first leap forward in human history, or one among many perhaps, we can imagine, and we don't know when this happened, maybe it was 50, 100,000 years ago, we might call this the birth of the human, the birth of abstract thinking. At some point, that power had to dawn upon humanity, the power to think abstractly. And it had to have happened quite a while ago, because you can't have human organizations at larger than the tribal level without some form of abstract thought. And by tribal level, I mean what they say, Dunbar's number is about 150. They say that this number is the number of people that you can reasonably have let's say, a close relationship with. And that number hasn't changed that much, if at all, throughout recorded human history. So if the size of the tribe was about 150, even in prehistory, even 50, 100,000 years ago, for humans to act coherently in larger than that tribal size required some leap of abstract thought. And the reason is that without abstract thought, you can still have a personal relationship with those 150 people. But if you're going to organize at any larger level, and we know that people started organizing at higher levels many thousands of years ago, you had to have an idea of belonging to a group that was not just comprised of the people that you personally knew. And that group membership was perhaps indicated in some abstract way, that you had you wore some sort of headdress, or you had some sort of marker that identified you as a member of a certain group, as opposed to a member of a warring group or something like that. And for that marker to have significance requires this abstract leap of thought. So there was at some point a birth within the human reality of this ability to think about things. And by the way, things like abstract thought are necessary to create any kind of economy, where you have, say, a means of trade. If you're going to invent for example, the idea of money as something which is a unit of exchange between people that has a certain value, and that value is somehow abstracted from the thing itself. That requires a tremendous leap of thought. But we know the idea of money has been around for at least several thousand years. Things like these are the necessary foundations for further leaps forward in human evolution. We might find in the next slide examples of this birth of abstract thought on the walls of the caves in Europe, where we found these cave paintings dating back tens of thousands of years of various animals, which you might think, okay, that isn't necessarily an abstract thought, but what about this cave bear skull that was found in an almost altar-like configuration, untouched for what was it, 40 or 50,000 years in the back of an old cave, that with footprints around it, suggesting that this might have been an early example of some sort of religious ritual. For that skull to have significance to those who were dancing around it required a very high level of abstract thought. We might, if we use the metaphor that Shoghi Effendi suggests in that quotation, that one of the core ideas of the Baha'i revelation is this idea of the coming of age of the human race, the attainment of the maturity of humanity, then we can ask, well, what were the stages of infancy and childhood? And that's kind of what we're doing right now, is we're projecting our minds back and asking, well, what would the infancy of the human race, or the birth of the human? Perhaps what we're looking at here are the archaeological traces that remain of the birth of humanity as fully distinguished from the animal, as being endowed with powers, capacities of the mind, which we know are at the same time capacities of the spirit, capacities of the mind that enable us to organize ourselves in ways that animals never could organize themselves. If the birth of the human is in this, lies somewhere in these distant, this distant past, then the emergence from infancy into childhood might be thought of as the next leap forward, which I think would be the next slide, which some historians, Carl Jaspers most famously, has called the axial age. And again, it's very easy to take an idea and poke holes in it, and it's very easy also to take any period of history and to try to break it into pieces for purposes of simplifying the analysis. But consider that there is something astonishingly similar that happened across multiple disconnected social, let's say, civilizational spheres in the ancient world over the span of several centuries, from about the 8th to the 3rd centuries BCE. From China in the Far East with the emergence of Confucianism and Taoism, to India with the Buddha, Persia starting to move west with Zoroaster, some of the prophets of Israel, and the emergence of Greek philosophy in the West. These 5 cultural domains had little social or cultural contact that we're aware of, but somehow among these 5 civilizations during this period emerged something very similar. A certain way of looking abstractly at the world became formalized. Of course, very differently in different cultures. The religions of the Far East are quite different from the religions of the West, which is different, which themselves are different from the thinking that emerged out of Greco-Roman civilization. But one can abstract from these different cultures and different civilizations and very different religious and social expressions something in common to all of them. It's as though humanity as a whole was passing through a stage in which some light turned on, and suddenly there was an awareness and a thinking about the world which agreed in various ways and through various, with different manifestations, but fundamentally agreed that we are in the world but not of the world. That life is a journey from a lower state to a higher state, from bondage to freedom, from appearance to reality, from darkness to light. It's called the axial age because one can imagine an axis, a sort of almost, it's been described as a world tree. It's something that that begins in the ground and stretches up into the sky. And that axial age provided humanity with a way of orienting itself, which saw our natural state as something from the state to which we were destined. It's the axial age that resulted in the birth of this idea of heaven and hell, of the material world and the spiritual world, of the higher and the lower. To the axial way of thinking, everyday life offers a mere shadow of reality. But with effort, we can get to the essence, which is clearer and more beautiful. And as I mentioned, there were different versions of the axial model, and only a couple are suggested in this photograph. And I put these two on because these two have particularly defined and shaped the history of ideas and the history of civilization in the West. And the contrast is between the thinking of the ancient Greeks and the Greco-Roman tradition and the thinking of the children of Israel and with the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition. Those today tend to be contrasted and described almost as mortal enemies. They represent the two sides of this unbridgeable chasm between the scientific worldview and the religious worldview. From the Greeks, the tradition of believing that our minds, through observation of the world and through the exercise of our minds, we can come to an understanding of the reality of things, and thus ascend that axis, to ascend the ladder, as Plato so beautifully described in his Symposium, to ascend the ladder of significances from appreciation of material things to appreciation of the forms that lie behind things. That's a pure expression of an axial model within the tradition of the ancient Greeks, as described by Plato 2,500 years ago. That same sort of axial model is visible in the sacred writings of the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition. The same idea that we're born as sinful, as lowly, as earthly, and it is our destiny to become heavenly. These two traditions, which today are thought as being completely at odds with each other, are close cousins because they share this ultimate axial model between them. The real rift actually today is not between these two ways of looking at the world, which one might say is they share the axial model. It's just that one of them looks from the top down and the other looks from the bottom up. One of them sees things fundamentally as we know the world through revelation, through a top-down process, almost literally top-down. You can imagine Moses descending Mount Sinai with the tablets, having received them at the top of the mountain, bringing it down to the people through a process which might just be as well be described as magic, as revelation. It comes from we know not where, but it comes with the full force and authority of the higher powers. That's this top-down view of things. But it's still an axial top-down model. And it's contrasted with this Greek way of thinking, which is let's say, the heritage of our modern scientific tradition, which is a very bottom-up picture. It's still axial. It's still proceeding from something lower to something higher. And nowadays, in this, let's say, in a secular scientific context, it's not obviously thought of as proceeding from the earthly to the heavenly, but it's more proceeding from observations of individual things and abstracting from it to the laws of physics. The laws of physics, the laws of the universe, which are expressed in beautiful, hopefully simple, or as simple as possible, but not too simple, mathematical form, take the place of those spiritual realities in the let's say, Eastern version of the axial model. So, as you can imagine, what I'll be suggesting is that these two models are not irreconcilable, but are close cousins of each other. There was actually a time during the medieval period where there was a synthesis of the Greek and let's say the Greek tradition and the Judeo-Christian tradition. What's called the medieval synthesis, perhaps the high point of which was the philosophy of Thomas Aquinas, who takes the sort of very logical, very sort of head approach to the deepest questions, the existence of God. Thomas Aquinas was the one who famously came up with 5 different proofs for the existence of God. So there was a medieval synthesis, an attempt to unite these two streams of thought by those who, at that time, even then, I think, realized that Judeo-Christian thought and Greek thought were very close cousins, and that there could be a union of these thought streams into something greater, and that was followed. This idea of this union of the two in medieval times in a Christian context was echoed later on in an Islamic context by philosophers of the Islamicate world who identified and adopted Socrates and Plato and Aristotle as divine philosophers, and saw them as part of their own tradition. And this is also adopted by and echoed by Baha'u'llah in his Tablet of Wisdom, where he refers to Socrates and Plato as divine philosophers. This is an example of this sort of bringing in this other branch of the tree and adopting it and as fully part of this larger spiritual tradition. But of course, spiritual from one perspective, but from another perspective, scientific and logical. So, this medieval synthesis, which we saw in the Christian world, in the Islamic world, dissolved in modern times, and it was dissolved by something which happened subsequent to this axial age, and we might call this the third leap forward. It was dissolved by the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution which preceded it. In our mapping of the realms and vast reaches of human history against the stages in the individual evolution, if this first leap forward was the birth of the human and the axial age was the emergence from infancy into childhood, then the Enlightenment might be thought of as this emergence from childhood into adolescence. And just as the adolescent child begins to start questioning things, mother and father said this, but I'm not so sure anymore that that's exactly the way things are. One of the hallmarks of adolescence is when the child begins to question what was before considered as unchallengeable received authority. And the child begins to use their own mind and their own powers of reasoning and their own powers of observation. This is exactly what happens in the Enlightenment. There is a collective sort of aha moment that happens, and it begins with the discovery of the scientific method by Bacon, its application by Copernicus and Galileo and these early champions of the scientific method, and producing results perhaps most spectacularly in the realm of astronomy, with Galileo's measurement of the discovery of the moons of Jupiter and the rings of Saturn, Copernicus's measurements which affirmed an early model of the heliocentric system, of reversing the position of the Earth and the Sun so that now the Earth goes around the Sun instead of the other way around. This all entailed an incredible acts of bravery by these people to go against what was the universally accepted, received wisdom of things. There were certain authorities which told us how the heavens went. And these early figures, given this incredibly powerful tool of the scientific method, were able to produce results and theories which were in conflict with this received wisdom. And if the first domino to fall in the edifice of human thought was perhaps astronomy, at least the most spectacular first domino to fall, and we're talking about the, let's say, late 1500s, then it's one after another, the dominoes start falling in other domains of human thought as the principles of reason, of investigation, and of not taking for granted the authority of the past began to seep into all domains of human life, beginning with scientific areas, moving into the political realm, moving into a questioning of the divine right of kings, was a necessary prelude to the emergence of the American Republic and the French Republic, and those great revolutions of the 1700s were the direct children of Enlightenment thinking and required this sort of adolescent leap of human thought, which no longer just accepted the way things were, but was willing to and eager to imagine something different. So the application then of the human intellect during the Enlightenment became the center of the truth-seeking enterprise. And our truth-seeking began to turn in an opposite direction than it was before. If before the Enlightenment, truth lay somewhere in the past, it was something that was revealed previously by a prophet, or it was written down by Aristotle and therefore couldn't be questioned. if that was the state of things before the Enlightenment, after the Enlightenment, truth lay in the opposite direction. The direction of our greater knowledge and understanding and wisdom now lays in the future, because now we have this idea of progress. It's not that we're receding farther and farther from the truth, which was somewhere revealed to us in the past, but we're now progressing closer and closer to the ultimate understanding and truth of things, which lies somewhere in the future. And that was made possible by the scientific method, and the idea that human culture and civilization, as it progresses, is accumulating knowledge, and that we continue to build upon the foundations of those who came before us. So this represented a huge shift in understanding. Kant describes this as I think quite prophetically in his essay, What is Enlightenment? He describes enlightenment as man's emergence from his self-imposed immaturity. Immaturity is the inability to use one's understanding without guidance from another. Dare to know. Have courage to use your own understanding. That is the motto of enlightenment. I think he's really echoing here what Shoghi Effendi was saying about the great, let's say, one of the great teachings and central teachings of the Baha'i faith, that the human race is passing through its adolescence and approaching its coming of age. That idea was also captured by Kant. But Kant was saying this in the 1700s, and Shoghi Effendi is saying this in the 1900s. So maybe the Enlightenment and this whole process of the emergence of human civilization from the state of childhood through the state of adolescence into the state of maturity, perhaps the Enlightenment, just as the axial age was a centuries-long process, around 800 to 300 BCE, perhaps the Enlightenment is also a multi-stage process. Perhaps we're still in the middle of it. It's not something that we just confine to 1680 to 1750 or whatever the latest historians say, this was the period of the Enlightenment. Obviously it can be helpful to describe certain people who were active at certain times and certain ideas that were being expressed, but maybe we're still in the middle of it. Maybe the Baha'i faith itself represents the latest stage in the Enlightenment, part of what we might call a greater Enlightenment. But before getting a little more into that, I wanted to sort of build a little bit more of the sort of ground to where we are now, because we have to jump from the traditional Enlightenment of the 1700s to the present day. But just to sort of summarize where we're at so far, the idea that abstract thought somehow characterizes, or even the birth of moral thinking, the idea of good and evil. The story of Adam and Eve in the Bible may just be that echo of the discovery of the moral dimension of human life, which records the birth of the human in another way. We don't know when this happened. Many thousands of years ago, as early as 100,000 years ago, let's say. The birth of the human and the childhood of the human, or the emergence into childhood, would have been this axial age, which happened over 2,000 years ago. And what I'll be suggesting is that the adolescence of the human race, which really began, let's say, in the 1600s and is continuing, and we're still in the throes of it now, 4 centuries later, is this period of which we might term the Greater Enlightenment. What happened after the Enlightenment of the 18th century, of the 1700s, was what many consider to be nothing less than a catastrophe for traditional religion and traditional modes of belief. This two-story model that we had with us from the axial age, the idea that there's an upper floor and a lower floor, that we're born into this lower floor, and the idea is to get upstairs, to get to heaven, to sort of ascend to the next world. The idea that the world can be broken up into our physical beings and our spiritual beings in a very in a very metaphysical sense. This two-story model from the axial age collapses from the Enlightenment on into the present age, and we're now standing in the ruins of that axial model. We in the West, it's a sort of scene of theological devastation, because that two-story model has collapsed from actually both ends. It's collapsed from the top down, because the idea, this Cartesian dualities have broken down. The traditional theologies have been dismissed as largely meaningless superstition. The great chain of being has been severed. The idea that all life, human life, and other life on the planet is all connected in this great chain of being by the will of God and sustained by the powers of the angels, and that gives everything its proper place. That chain of being has been destroyed. Nietzsche, famously in the late 19th century, proclaimed the death of God, and I think truly proclaimed the death of God, because the God that died in the late 19th century is that God of the childhood of the species. It's the God of the superstitions of the past, which is well and truly dead, even if its shadows still exist among us today, and if people still have yet to fully realize that God is not going to be returning. But this two-story structure, the axial model, also was destroyed from the ground up. So from the top down, it's been destroyed, and from the bottom up, it's been destroyed. And this bottom-up destruction of this of the axial worldview came with questions on the power of reason itself, and the ability of the scientific method itself to get at the ultimate realities of things. David Hume wrote in England in the 1700s very famously on the limits of reason, and how what we take to be the laws of causality are really just a matter of convention and agreement, and seeing that things, that the sun rises tomorrow is not a law, it's just a convention. It happens to be that every morning the sun rises, but we can't deduce from that logically, mathematically, with absolute certainty that the sun is therefore going to rise tomorrow, just because it rose every morning in the past. Kant himself, one of the great architects of the Enlightenment, gave us some of the seeds of its own destruction, perhaps, when he argued that our understanding of things is limited through our own subjective experience, that we have no direct contact with reality, but our interface with reality is always cast through the lens of our own subjective perceptions, which can be fooled in various ways, and which can lead us to the wrong conclusions in various ways. And Kant very famously also set up these opposites, where he said, well, I can prove to you that God exists, and I can prove to you that he doesn't exist, and I can prove to you that the soul is immortal, and I can prove that it's not immortal, and I can prove that the universe has no beginning, and that the universe existed in time. And all of this he did just by the sort of the logical tricks of the trade that showed that just logic alone is not going to get you to the answers to any of these questions of ultimate concern, these ultimate theological questions that people had based their whole worldviews on. And it's partly as a result of Kant's, let's say, outlining of the fundamental limitations of reason that led to some of the modern rejections of reason, what you might call postmodernism, which rejects the idea that we have any way of saying what's true and what's not. It rejects all attempts at providing grand narratives, any attempts at explaining the whole picture of things, and replaces it only with power struggles. It says there's no truth out there to be discovered. There are only different people arguing for their version of the truth. And that's kind of where the situation lies in the modern universities of today, at least in many of the humanities departments. Even the idea of progress is thrown out the window. The idea that has formed such a core of our understanding of civilization over millennia, that humanity has been progressing, advancing technologically, socially, mentally. This idea of progress even is thrown out the window as being just a remnant of the edifice of religious thought. And it's thrown out the window because the idea that there is goal-directed behavior, that there is a purpose to things, has to be rejected almost on principle. All forms of teleology are rejected because that's a way of bringing religion back in through the back door. If you want to argue that there is progress, then that there must be some overarching structure to things that makes things move in this direction and not in that direction. And that's a way of sneaking God back in through the back door. So for the modern secular mindset, there can be no talk of progress. There can be no talk of goal-directed behavior. When you talk about evolution, it has to just be random. Even though the fact of evolution over the last 5 million years is that life has emerged from a relatively simple state to the relatively complex state that embodied particularly in the human brain. It's not that has to just be an accident, because if not, then you have to admit that there must be some overarching goal-directed behavior that evolution submits to. And that idea that evolution could possibly have a purpose, that there could possibly be something behind all of these physical processes in the world, is outright rejected by the secular world today. As you can imagine, we'll be suggesting a different framework, a different way of understanding these things in the hours to come. But what remains amidst the ruins of the axial age and let's say the meaningless present is a world of facts, a world of information with no coherence. It's as though it were a tile mosaic with the cement removed, so that now you have these scattered tiles, each of which has a piece of a picture, but they form no picture because there's nothing gluing them together. Modern society modern secular society gives no answers to the deepest questions, but accumulating things and having experiences. Local and traditional narratives, cultures are subsumed by a world culture of nihilistic consumerism. And that would be bad, and that is a bad thing. But one might say that on the plus side, most of the world is actually still living in a pre-Enlightenment sort of mindset. I mean, I'm describing the post-Enlightenment secular, all meaning has now been drained of things except the meaning that you make of it. But really, most of the world still hasn't yet come to terms with Enlightenment thinking. Most people still think in traditional forms. I think it was Alfred North Whitehead who said that the most deep ideas in civilization take about 1,000 years to sort of filter their way through and become universally held. And I think there's some truth to that. Take for example the idea of evolution, which has been around now for 150 years, but still, despite the overwhelming evidence that there is physical evolution of things, that all life is genetically related, still many people in the educated West still reject this idea. So the roots of the Enlightenment have not sunk in as deeply as we think. And as a result of that, this edifice of Judeo-Christian ethics, perhaps to our benefit, is still with us. It still hangs as though suspended in the air, the intellectual foundations having long since been knocked out. But we're seeing, I think, the accelerating destruction of that edifice of ethics because it has no grounding at the present time, and we're seeing the sort of final destruction of the old. But that destruction of the old that we're seeing, to recapitulate a point I made at the beginning, is not a chaos to be entirely feared, but it's a chaos that's generative. The old paradigms have to break to make way for the new. The wildfire has to sweep through the forest from time to time to clear out the useless weeds that grow up in the course of time, and to make room for and leave space for the tallest trees in the forest to grow. There's a function to the wildfire. There's a function to the wave of secular ideologies, of the new atheist movement, people proclaiming in various ways, the death of God for 150 years. Those are friends of the trees. The wildfire is the friend of the trees because it questions things that for too long have not been questioned and have needed to be questioned, and it clears the ground for the emergence of the new. This says something, I think, very profound about collective human consensus-generating mechanisms. Different ideologies, religions, political forms of governance. Everything has a pull date on it. There's an expiration. However fresh they were at the beginning, over the course of time, as it's cast into the world, everything gets old and needs to be refreshed. This is true in the physical world. It's true in the human world. It's another of many examples of processes, of cyclical processes that are reenacted in various ways in the physical world, but also in the human world. So there's cruft that needs to be removed, and the renewal is I think nigh upon us, and the challenge that's facing us is to find in the pieces of the old the parts that need to be brought forward, and then to find the new pieces that are now that are only recently added to this mosaic that we want to reconstruct. So it's in that light that I want to suggest that the writings of the Baha'i faith and the inspiration of the Baha'i revelation represents a continuation and really culmination of the Enlightenment project that began centuries ago. That it represents collectively this spiritual coming of age of the human race, as the human race has been coming of age in a material sense since the scientific revolution. We see this sort of anticipation of, and this is one way of thinking about the sort of the movement of the Enlightenment itself, this greater Enlightenment. We can think of it as progressing in different stages. The scientific was the first in the late 1500s, the 1600s, beginning with this Copernican world system. What some have called the second Copernican revolution, I think, well, Kant himself labeled it that. He labeled his own philosophy the second Copernican revolution, perhaps slightly immodestly, but I think there's a great deal of truth to that. Because what he did is similar to what Copernicus did. What Kant did in philosophy is very similar to what Copernicus did in astronomy. Copernicus took the Earth, which was assumed to be at the center of everything, and he showed us that we're not actually the center of everything. The sun is really the center of everything. Of course, now we know that even the sun is not the center of everything. But the idea is that something which was in the, let's say, naive childhood of the human race, that the child naively assumes that it is the center of everything. Anyone who's had a child knows this. It's part of the stage of human evolution. It's not a bad thing that a child is naturally self-centered. It's a stage that you go through. And as you emerge from childhood into adolescence, you realize, I'm not the center of the universe anymore. And this is exactly what happened with Copernicus and the heliocentric model. We realized physically, we're not the center of the universe anymore. And Kant did the same thing in philosophy as Copernicus did in physics, in astronomy. Kant says we're not the center of we're not at the center of things either when it comes to the meanings. Kant thrusts humanity out of the center by saying we have no access to things in themselves. He says, we used to think, from the time of Plato and Socrates, we used to think that with enough thought, one could get at the ultimate apprehension of the forms. One could contact ultimate reality. And that was echoed in sort of in its own way within the axial tradition, in traditions of Christianity and the Judeo-Christian Islamic as well as Eastern traditions, the idea that the human soul can directly know God. So what Kant does in the philosophical domain is he says we have no direct contact with reality. So we're thrust again from the center. Now we're somewhere on the outside looking in, trying to look through the veils of the senses, trying to see through these distorting lenses of our own imperfect intellects and our own imperfect senses to try to get at reality. But reality is now somewhere which is farther away. What the Bab and Baha'u'llah do in the religious sphere is, I think, analogous in many ways to what Kant and Copernicus did in the philosophical and astronomical domains. The Bab and Baha'u'llah take us out of our childish notions, and by childish, one doesn't. They were good for their time. They were appropriate for their time to think about God in certain ways, to think about spirit in certain ways, to think about the nature of a prophet in certain ways, to think about religion in certain ways. There are certain age-appropriate ways for humanity to conceptualize these deepest metaphysical and spiritual questions, and the Bab and Baha'u'llah are coming to remove us from that center, remove us from that, let's say, that childlike self-centeredness, and to tell us, you know what, you have no access to ultimate truth. You have no direct access to God. The religious truth is not absolute. Religious truth is relative. That's a wrenching away from the sorts of dogmatic certainties which defined every religion past. That there was some set of dogma, there was some litmus test of truth that if you believed in this set of bullet points, then you would be right on top of the truth. The Nicene Creed, is a perfect example of that sort of formula of here's what distinguishes truth from error. And if you've got all of these points in this creed, then you're right on top of it. You've got the truth. Baha'u'llah and the Bab tell us that's not how it works. At least not today. That might have been how we thought about it before. But today, we have to think differently. We have to understand that the deepest truths of things are simply not absolute, but they are relative to our level of understanding. And that level of understanding is both horizontal and vertical. But what I mean by that is that level of understanding both evolves in time. If you think of time as like a vertical axis, but it's also relative in space, the horizontal axis. It's relative between one period of human culture and the next, but it's also relative between human cultures and between human individuals at a given time period, which means the principle of the relativity of religious truth is active not just as a principle saying that, let's say, that Christianity is more evolved in some ways than Judaism, going from an eye for an eye to turn the other cheek. It represents some step forward in human spiritual evolution. It's not just saying that, but it's also saying that within a given religious epoch, there will necessarily and naturally be people with different viewpoints of things, and that those viewpoints are correct. Not all of them are correct within their perspective, because there's still a litmus to you. It's not a free-for-all. You're not saying all truths are equally true or all perspectives are equally true. But you are saying that there is some subset of possible perspectives which are relatively true. And there's a big difference between relativism and relativity. Relativism would say, well, it's all just a matter of perspective. Relativity technically says there is an overarching structure within which certain perspectives are relatively true. More on that in a few slides, I think. So this is one way, I think, of looking at where we're at. We're trying to sort of give this big picture of where humanity has been and where it's headed. And I haven't yet given the sort of the circle that I think pulls it all together, and that's going to have to wait until tomorrow. What I wanted to do was give enough of a sort of hint of where we think we're going to then suggest that what we are on the verge of the new, the verge of a new kind of spirituality, that we're on the verge of a new kind of religious identity, of a new way of being religious, a new way of organizing and structuring religious identity, which, for starters, embraces the idea that truth is relative, that embraces the idea that that finds a way of being maximally inclusive to different perspectives, because that's the only way the world is going to come together. The only way we're going to create the unity that we think humanity is destined towards is not by making everyone believe exactly the same thing, saying, here's your Nicene Creed, this is truth, and everything else is error. The way forward is going to be fundamentally different, which is going to be accepting and embracing differences sometimes at a very fundamental level. Very different ways of thinking about God, the existence of God, different ways of thinking about spirit, different ways of thinking about what is a prophet. But the point of unity then lies not within a set of dogmatic finalities, but the point of unity lies in the sphere of action. It lies in the sphere of the world. It lies in the sphere of the intersubjective agreements that we come to through the processes of consultation. So what I'm suggesting is that the timeless essence of the sacred, the parts of the wisdom of the past that remain in the ruins of the modern. The old structures of thinking of the past may have fallen, but within the ruins of those structures are the intact gems and the pieces that have to be carried forward. These intact pieces, the timeless portions of the religions of the past, will be recast in a new form suited to the exigencies of the day as we go forward. And this new configuration of religious identity will solve simultaneously two big problems. The problems of religious, inter-religious conflict, and the problem of the conflict between science and religion. So two of the major sources of division and disagreement are solved simultaneously by this new way of looking and thinking and being in the world. The tribalisms which lie behind the current diversity of religions will be subsumed under a larger framework which recognizes them all in their relative truths and elevates them and gives them the due reverence to the sacred that they deserve. And at the same time, they will be seen ultimately not in conflict with a scientific view of the world, but ultimately as forming part of an integrated way of looking at our combined spiritual and material heritage. The real fault line, I would argue, in the world today really is not between those who say I believe in God and those who say I don't believe in God. That's actually not the real fault line, because a lot of people who say they don't believe in God, I don't believe in that God either. that they don't believe in. I mean, saying you don't believe in God is kind of doesn't necessarily mean you don't believe in God. I mean, it means you don't believe in the way most people think about God is not worthy of belief. Frankly, I mean, and Abdu'l-Baha says this so clearly. I wish I had the slide at my fingertips, but he basically says everyone today is worshiping the gods of their own idle imaginations. He says it would be better to worship a stone, because at least the stone has a mineral existence. Whereas those idols of people's thoughts and conceptions of what God is and is not, he says, doesn't even have a mineral existence. It doesn't exist at all. And so when people say they don't believe in God, I have no problem with that. The real question is there meaning out there to be discovered, or isn't there? And by saying, yes, there's meaning out there to be discovered, is not trying to slip that old God back in through the back door. It could be. I mean, you could say that in an attempt to slip the old God back into the back door, but that's not the way I mean it. When there's meaning to be discovered, when I think about that phrase, I don't think about it in terms of traditional theologies. And we're going to be looking at how the Baha'i writings reconfigure the idea of God and belief in God in the sessions to come. So we're going to be looking at we're going to be looking at particularly the Baha'i writings and from their perspective how they break down some of these traditional dualities and tensions. But before we do that, we're gonna have to do a couple of things to set the groundwork, and that's basically going to be today is like setting the groundwork for all of this, and tomorrow is going to be much more looking at a number of instances from the Baha'i writings. And I don't want to impose too much on your concentration. It's hard to concentrate for more than about an hour at a time, and I know I've been scheduled for like 2-hour chunks, which is a lot to ask of you. Particularly consider the density of these ideas, and so I don't want to sort of go past the time where it's diminishing returns. So if it makes sense to sort of take a break for a glass of water, I could use a glass of water. If it makes sense to do that, this would be a good breaking point, because what I'm going to talk about next is I'm going to suggest that the future reconfiguration of religion, or the reconfiguration of our spiritual identity, which is ongoing, is happening in parallel with the reconfiguration of our understanding of the physical world, which modern science has brought us. And the two are remarkably parallel. And what I'm going to be doing is looking, first of all, at some ideas in modern physics, and some ideas, some of the, let's say, the deepest ideas that have emerged in our study of modern physics, and try to thank you, to pull out some themes and threads which we'll find have an astonishing similarity to some of the core ideas in the Baha'i conception of spiritual reality. And I'll be doing that sort of in the next stage. But what time is it right now? Let's see. It's 11:30. I'm supposed to go until when? Okay. Yeah. Why don't we? Because this is a good. I just feel like I don't want to sort of keep droning on. So maybe we can pause for Q&A. And I'll come back to this in the afternoon session. So, any thoughts up until now on these ideas? Yes. And should you? I guess there was a point about using the microphone. We do have a second microphone, so I'm bad at remembering to repeat the question. Horrible at that. So let's pass the mic around for questions. And there was a question right here in the front. Oh, at the very beginning. Yes. Yes. There.
Okay. I was just.
Oh, hey, that's perfect. Okay, I'm right on. Okay, I'm right on schedule. I thought I was going to have to do the modern physics thing in the. Okay, good. We're good.
Very good.
Yeah.
I was wondering if there's any. Have you written a book about this? Where can we find?
No.
No.
This is the only place you can find these ideas for now.
YouTube has some.
SoundCloud has more.
SoundCloud.
Just search my name in SoundCloud and you'll find two different things. You'll find, I don't know, a week's worth of this in Acuto, Italy, 3 years ago or so, and you'll find, I think, 8 talks on from Norway on SoundCloud. And on YouTube, there's a bunch of other things. I haven't yet, because for me, this is all very provisional, and I'm working things out as I'm talking almost. And so, and every time it evolves a bit more. That's one reason why I haven't wanted to put it down in writing, because, I would hate myself the next year when I looked at what I wrote and realized all my thinking had changed. Eventually, hopefully, it'll be put in written form. Yes. Oh, sorry. I don't know who the second person was, but.
Roger had a question first.
Yeah, anyway, on the internet, there'd been kind of a debate about Einstein's true religion, and he'd make one statement, the humanist, he's
Yeah.
human. And then another one, he'd say the Christian, he's really Christian. Another one says he's really atheist. Another one says he's agnostic. What's your take on?
Everyone wants a piece of Albert Einstein.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he said so many things that you can sort of take, you can have your own Einstein if you filter his statements the way you want. I think what is clear is that he had a deep sense of awe and reverence, and I would say authentic, spirituality about the scientific enterprise and about sort of the ultimate, what he was ultimately doing. But he did not see it in traditional theological terms, and he was reacting to a lot of people trying to make him into an ally of religion, and he carefully distinguished his ideas from those. He felt, religion on the whole was a bag full of superstitions, and I think the Baha'i writings agree with him on that.
I kind of wonder just the postmodernist idea where, there really is no meaning or everything is subjective. I'm sort of wondering why so many of these people are in universities. Is that what they have to teach, or just, that you're wrong and you're wrong and you're wrong? Are they coming up with anything more positive?
Well, it's easy to caricature the modern universities as having sort of lost their bearings and now they're fully immersed in the sort of postmodernism, anything goes kind of viewpoint. And there's some truth to that when you lose the ground, then of all narratives, then the big problem is how then do you weigh different narratives? And the challenge of postmodernism, which is at the same time, I think, the promise of postmodernism, because it's a good thing and a bad thing at the same time. It's a good thing because now you're allowing formerly disadvantaged groups to have a voice. And postmodernism does that to a T. I mean, now everyone, every group can now speak, and they might not have had a voice before. And that's, I think, a necessary part of this process of adolescence and growing up. The adolescent sort of, shaking your fist and asserting your own individuality is something we have to get through, and we have to honor that. And more than honoring it in a sort of patronizing way, we also have to truly honor what has been done to disadvantage minorities in the past and work to rectifying that. And so there's sort of a bright side to the postmodernist project. At the same time, the dark side of it is, you end up with sort of chaos and confusion in the realm of action. There's how do you build a platform for coherent action? And that's the real challenge that the world faces. The perfect example is the environment. Okay, it's come down to we either figure out how to work together globally from country to country, or we're in real danger of extinguishing ourselves, of rendering ourselves extinct. And to move forward on these sorts of issues requires collective acts of will and the ability to talk to each other and not at each other, and to consult and to be able to come up with collective modes of action. And that's where postmodernism doesn't offer much there. And that's itself an oversimplification, and I'm not an expert on it. But I think, as with all things, there's usually some good and some bad to be acknowledged. Yeah.
Yeah. Over here.
Yes. Sorry.
Okay, I actually have two questions for you. One is, you said a maximum inclusiveness of differences begins, and I think you said unity through consultation and such. And I'm assuming that part of that has to do with our working with people of other religions with joy and fragrance, with the idea of let's find common ground, as opposed to, if everybody I talk to, yes, I would like you to become a Baha'i, but it's one of those things, if we can just come to common ground, that it seems to me like the first step. So, and I'm assuming that you were saying the same type of thing actually with the science-religious conflict, is that, again, if you're using consultation to come to common ground, you at least have an understanding of which you can now base things going forward. Is that
Sure.
what you were saying?
Although even on your first point, the idea of, as I'll talk about a little bit more, the whole idea that there's this religion and that religion is like something we have to evolve beyond. And it's difficult to know exactly how to do that because it's never been done before. What the Baha'i revelation is doing, I think, is trying to create a mode of religious identity which has no precedent. Because every religion in the past has been, I'm a member of this religion, not that religion. And Baha'u'llah didn't come to bring one more religion. There's actually a beautiful quotation from a statement prepared by the House of Justice saying, Baha'u'llah didn't come to bring one more religion to stand alongside the existing multiplicity of sectarian organizations. Rather has he recast the very conception of religion as the principal force impelling the development of consciousness. It's like it kind of blows open the whole thing. And so our conversations with people of other faiths is not so much, we aren't even thinking, do I want you to become a Baha'i or not? It's more like, can we elevate the conversation to a place where we realize that there is and has always only been one religion and one faith of God, and that faith of God is also part of the scientific history of the human race, is part of the changeless faith of God. I mean, it's all this collective evolution of human consciousness, which you can describe in a secular way as, we're just getting smarter, or we're just getting better at building gadgets, or from a spiritual perspective, you can think of this as we're evolving closer to God. We're returning to God just as we came from God. It's two sides of the same coin. It's two language games, to use a phrase from a famous philosopher, to describe the same reality. And when we understand that there are different language games, and by game is not meant to trivialize it, but to say that there are different, let's say, systems of thought and significance. And just like there are different human languages, there are different spiritual languages and different ways of describing matters of ultimate concern. And when we realize that sometimes you can talk in one language to one group and in a different language to another group, and it doesn't mean you're being inconsistent. It just means you've shifted registers. One of my favorite quotes of Plato, we'll see it in the next session or 2 sessions from now, is he points out this problem of language or written speech versus spoken speech. He says there's a huge difference between speech and writing. And without thinking about it, you think, well, it's the same thing. They're both words, and one of them can be translated. You can translate a speech into words on a page, and there you are. It's the same thing. But Plato points out they're actually 2 completely different things, because in speech, you're talking to someone. You have an audience. And so what you're saying is necessarily adapted to the person you're talking to. But once you put it down in writing, it says that page now is floating all over the place. You don't know who's going to read it. You don't know who the audience is. And so how do you decide what to write down? Because if there are different language games, if there's different sorts of ways of expressing yourself that are suited to different sorts of audiences, once you've committed something to writing, you've now narrowed down the whole thing. And the thing that you've written may now end up in front of a person to whom it was not meant, and they might get the wrong idea from it. And I think that gives us, we'll talk about it next segment, maybe tomorrow, but that gives us, I think, a pretty interesting insight about the nature of the word, the logos, what differentiates sacred writings from other writings, has something to do with this sort of feature of the difference between speech and writing. Anyway, that wasn't an answer to the question, but it sort of went off on a tangent.
It was great. It was fine.
Okay.
But I do have one other question, and that is, and this I won't hold you to, but in your crystal ball, would you say that basically this trying to come to this even understanding that we need to kind of figure out what is this basis and this post-enlightenment, 1,000 years?
Definitely centuries. I mean, for sure. I think, yeah.
Hi, Doctor.
Hi.
I just wondered if you're taking the position now that in this post-enlightenment era, that we view truth as relative still, and we're not taking the position that truth is not relative, but beyond that.
Well, the position I think would be that truth is out there, but we never have direct contact with it. And so all we can do is approximate it in various ways. And because the truth is, and there isn't just one direction to get at the truth. You can get at it through different directions. It's like a jewel with different facets, and you can sort of get at that truth through different facets. And so in that sense, truth is relative to our perspective. But to say that it's relative is not to say that there is no truth or that it's not out there somewhere. It's just to disengage it from the center. And that's part of the whole sort of Enlightenment project, which I was arguing is this sort of taking us out of our natural, sort of childhood in which we're at the center of it, and realize as adults that we're not at the center of it, and that there's something bigger than us, and that's, I think, part of it. Does it bring us back to Plato? Yeah, well, Plato felt that the truth was out there, that the forms were there, that the Platonic forms or ideas were there undergirding and underlying all things, but what Plato said was that one could, and most famously in his Symposium and in Book 7 of his Republic, he suggested that one could actually contact those truths. One could actually reach that the final revelation, and a lot depended on that. A lot sort of flowed from that idea of Plato's, which I think was not good. Because if you look at how Plato then took that idea and tried to evolve that into a system, political system, it ended up being very elitist. He had and he suggested eugenics, and there was a gold and a silver and a bronze, and the gold are those who had access to the truth, to the forms, and that everyone else was below that. And he imagined a very sort of hierarchical society. It's very dystopian. If no one could imagine enacting how Plato imagined the ideal society would work. And I think part of the reason why that clearly doesn't work is because we don't have ultimate access to the truth. So you can't identify the gold members of society that have the contact with the forms, that are the certifiable repositories of truth. That simply doesn't exist in the world. Whoever has the mic gets to speak next.
Thank you. In the last hour and a half, you've got me rethinking what I thought I understood, and thank you for doing that. When you started talking about what to quote Mao Zedong, the great leaps forward, I started trying to pigeonhole them into the appearance of manifestations. Obviously, we can't do that 100,000 years ago, but certainly your second leap corresponds with a lot of manifestations,
Several,
like Zoroaster and so on.
Yeah.
And then I found myself thinking, but Muhammad came in 600, and that was not one of the leaps. The Enlightenment starts in 1600, which is not the appearance of a manifestation of God, unless it's one we don't know about.
Right.
And then, while lots of things have obviously happened since the Bab and Baha'u'llah came, you're still defining that as part of the same period.
Yeah.
And I know the writings tell us we can't understand God's plan, so I'm not asking you to explain it. But do you have any thoughts on the dichotomy?
Yes. I guess it would be that it's tempting to take the 9 known manifestations that are listed, that Baha'is sort of recognize, and then try to line it up kind of one-to-one with, okay, this manifestation brought this civilization into being, and this manifestation brought this civilization into being. But when you really look at history, it's just not as clean, as sort of clean as that. There's and part of it, I think, is the nature of how divine inspiration filters its way into the world is not solely through the agency of those 9 individuals, but it's also through the agency of our collective exploration of nature, as in the case of science. And in the case of Abdu'l-Baha gives us, I think, breaks things open for us a little bit. In a very recently published writing that's been put on the reference library website, and it sort of came very quietly a few months ago, but there's some real I think earthquakes in these bits of writings that are out there. Again, they're not published in a book, but you have to go to the website to find them. But Abdu'l-Baha here says that there are 3 kinds of prophets. We're used to hearing there's 2 kinds of prophets. There's major and minor prophets. So Abdu'l-Baha says in another place, he says there's 3 kinds of prophets. He says there's the major prophets that we sort of recognize as those who have brought a book and founded a religion, and then there's minor prophets that are somehow subordinate to them, like, for example, the prophets of the house of Israel. Then he says, but there's a 3rd kind of prophet, which is a prophet which is sent to a particular village or particular locality. I think it might be how it was translated. And so the idea of revelation now sort of loses these sharp boundaries, and now you have the possibility of there being, as you know, there had to have been. I mean, what about the people of the Americas, who don't have a prophet that we recognize? How do you, that's not on that list of 9, but humanity and civilization there also progressed through a similar sort of process of there being individuals which help to catalyze further progress. And it comes to a point which we're definitely going to be getting into much more detail tomorrow, which is, what is the prophet anyway? What is our idea of the prophet? And is there another way of looking at the nature of who the prophet is and what they know and what they bring, and how is it exactly differentiated from what other inspired people say and do? It's a huge question that we have to be able to answer, particularly in a secular world that now no longer recognizes the idea of a prophet, that actually sees it as part of the sort of childish superstitions of the past, that anyone could be born with inherent knowledge. I mean, that's a silly idea, right? Or the idea that anyone, has authority to tell you what to do. Why? Because God told me. that idea is laughed at now today. So one has to, from a Baha'i perspective, which is very much based on the idea that that there are actually two prophets, so we have twice the job to do, is explain what is the nature of the power and authority and knowledge of the prophet. And we're going to be taking a deep dive at that tomorrow.
And the question of unity, you mentioned the thought of existentialism as well as the concept and the search for ultimate truth. What are your thoughts in terms of unity, in terms of the appearance versus reality of thought?
As in terms of where unity is a big.
Yeah, where are you coming from in terms of your thoughts on the questions of appearances versus reality in relation to the concept of ultimate truth in the search for unity?
I'm going to talk about unity in the context of the circle of existence tomorrow, and unity will be seen as one of two or three core ideas. One has to ask, first of all, what is the purpose of unity? What's the point of unity? Because one can imagine good and bad kinds of unities. One can imagine a unity which is a sort of tyrannical unity, which brings everyone together under some very, steel-fisted law, and there's no war anymore, but it's a unity that excludes certain kinds of freedoms. And so the sort of unity that we are moving towards has to be a unity that balances, on the one hand, individual freedoms, and on the other hand, provides the necessary degree of justice that ultimately would not be there if you're too swung towards the pole of individual freedom. And the question of unity, I think, begins in the material world. It's ultimately unity. It's the uniting of elements in the primordial realm that ultimately unlock greater potentialities. I think that's a sort of overarching statement about what unity does. In the first moments of the Big Bang, it's the coming together of the quarks into the initial nucleons that enable the existence of atoms, and it's the joining of the electrons onto those nucleons, and then it's the coming together of the different hydrogen atoms to form stars, and it's the uniting of those initial hydrogen atoms in stars that creates the pressure necessary to ignite those hydrogen atoms to cause the stars to shine.
But
Ultimately,
that is the thought of pursuing knowledge in the future. Now, you also made the statement about the old can be refreshed. And so, how do you do that when you're talking about advancing? Well, your whole presentation's been about past and moving forward.
yeah.
But we don't talk about the present, and presently we're dealing with the conflict of ideology all over the place.
Yes.
So
yes.
I just need some understanding of where you're coming from on that.
Yes. I'm going to be dealing with the ideas I'm presenting. I hope are presented with the goal of giving us a way forward through the present morass, through the present polarization and through the present conflicting ideologies that exist in the world, in the academy, and the sort of is most highly embodied in the sort of this postmodernism free-for-all that we're seeing, but also more generally in society, in the clashes between civilizations, that we're seeing. The rise of China and the West is, the clash between Islam and Christianity, and also, at the highest level and at lower levels, the racial conflict and class conflict at the level of nations. All of these disunities need a new framework of ideas to enable to unify them. And so what I'm suggesting is a framework of ideas that enables these different conflicting ideologies to find some sort of common ground. That's the hope.
Thank you so much, Dr. Phelps. Please give him a hand. There's so much to hear, so much to learn, and please save any question that you had from this morning for another time. We want to make sure you have time to get in everything that you have to say, but we also want people not to feel pressured and that you have time to commune with one another. So right now, Susanna has some announcement for us, and we want you to take advantage of all the good things that are happening around campus, and to make sure you remember the lunchtime is 12:30 to 1:15.
Hello. All right, first of all, because I think lunch may be on everybody's mind, we have a little saying, eat your peas. And the people with the green name tags, they're going to be going first. And so if you have a green name tag, you'll be going in the lunch line first. So the eat your peas people are going first. The